Hey, good morning, everyone. Today is Thursday, July the 30th, 2020. My name is Lisa Terry, and I am the Director of Financial Management and Education here at Financial Pathways of the Piedmont. We are a local nonprofit United Way agency in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Today, I have the pleasure and privilege of speaking with Ed Sharp, who is a legal aid attorney who is an attorney with legal aid housing supervisor in the housing division. The purpose of today's discussion, as we all know, through this COVID crisis, the financial impact is about to take its toll on our community. With the CARES Act recently in place, we have had certain concessions, moratoriums, and things of that nature that has eliminated or prolonged possible eviction, foreclosure, utility cutoff, etc. And all of these concessions are coming to an end starting this month. So we wanted to talk with Ed today to find out the specifics around eviction process here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina for Forsyth County, what folks need to be thinking about, how the CARES Act or the COVID crisis impacts some of those changes. And as we all know, these things have changed rapidly, and there's no telling what could still change going forward. But just to get a common ground and a foundation of some things to think about and providing this information to our community, I think is very important. So Ed, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So Ed, biggest question. I know everybody knows what an eviction is, but what's the legal definition or the legalese behind what an eviction actually is in the eye of the court?
An eviction is a civil action almost always filed in small claims court. And one of the most important things to know is that a tenant cannot be evicted, cannot actually be removed from the property by anyone other than the sheriff of Forsyth County. And the process is that the landlord must file a complaint and summary ejectment in small claims court, and that court document is then served either in person on the tenant or by posting, which is an important distinction. Then there's a trial held, usually within 2 weeks of the service of the court documents, the complaint and summary ejectment. And then a magistrate decides the case. If the magistrate orders possession be returned to the landlord, then the tenant, whether the tenant appears in court or not, the tenant has 10 days to appeal. On the 11th day, if the tenant does not appeal, the landlord can apply for a writ of possession from the clerk of court. That writ is then taken to the sheriff, and the sheriff usually executes that writ 7 days later. So the sheriff, if the tenant does nothing, the sheriff is usually out to padlock the place in about 17 or 18 days after the date of trial.
So from the beginning of the filing of the ejection summary, what kind of timeline is this from, like, beginning to the court, the sheriff coming to the door and padlocking the door?
It varies because of when weekends and holidays fall. But from the date the landlord files until the time the sheriff comes out, it's usually around 30 days, but it can be as little as 28 days. And of course, if the landlord is a little bit inefficient or lazy and they don't get the writ immediately, it can be much longer than that.
So that kind of also makes me wonder now with the current pandemic and with courthouses, sometimes their schedules are a little bit off or they're altered, or what is the state of the courthouses right now in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County with regards to the pandemic? Are they fully functioning?
For the most part, yes. It's important to note that the clerk's office has never stopped functioning fully, and they're the ones who process the court papers and supply the writs of possession. The courts themselves, when it comes to summary ejectment, the eviction courts are now fully up and running. They were shut down from mid-March until sometime in mid-June, but they are now up and fully functioning. And the district courts, so if a tenant appeals to district court, the district courts are now also running. They're trying to maintain some social distancing, so they're not quite running at full capacity.
So have you been able to note any kind of increase? I know it's only been a week, well, less than a week, then some of the eviction moratoriums has ended. So this week, has there been an uptick in filings of evictions?
There was a big wave of evictions that were filed on or just after June 22, because that's when one of the moratoriums ended, and lots of landlords filed the week of June 22. And so we saw, I don't know if I would call it a wave, because the courts tried to space them out a little bit, but at this point, they're processing a lot of evictions. So it's anecdotal, we haven't done a study yet, but what we are seeing is pretty large eviction dockets, and we expect them to get bigger.
So that means that then pretty much timeline wise, by the end of August, it could be really detrimental with the amount of residents in our community who could be essentially homeless or evicted from an apartment or a rental unit.
Yes, so starting in late August, what we call CARES Act properties, such as public housing, project-based Section 8 housing, tenants who have Section 8 vouchers themselves, those landlords will begin to file evictions for non-payment. They're already allowed to file evictions for other things.
Okay.
The Housing Authority of the City of Winston-Salem, to their credit, have been very slow to file any kind of evictions during this period, but they are starting to file evictions for things other than non-payment, and
Okay.
they're probably going to start filing for non-payment in very late August. I would like to say that we're lucky here in Winston-Salem because the magistrates are unusually well educated when it comes to how to handle all of the various different moratoriums. And they have done a superb job of managing these often conflicting and very confusing moratoriums and dismissing cases that needed to be dismissed, even when there's no lawyer there to remind them that they've really been on top of it.
Oh, that's good to know then. So that means that if there are potential landlords or property owners that may not either be trying to necessarily work around the law, but if they're not quite sure of what the rules are, that someone else hopefully is going to cover that and make sure that they can't necessarily evict someone improperly.
Yes, that's what we've seen while observing business in small claims court.
Okay. Are there still situations where you may be seeing or where attorneys are seeing improper or I can't think of the word that I want to use, possibly bullying tenants or scaring or using intimidation tactics to try and evict them without knowing what their rights are?
Yes, without question. We've seen a lot of that because particularly when the eviction courts were shut down, some landlords got very frustrated and didn't feel that they had to abide by those laws, but the courts were shut down, so their only option was to employ bullying tactics. We saw this a lot in hotel motels. If you are somebody who that's your primary residence, that's where you live, then you have to be evicted. And the motels were not used to that, and many of them employed threats and bullying tactics, which frankly worked in a number of cases. But I'm very pleased to say that one of the common methods they used is to call the police. And for most of the reports that we've received is that the police would arrive, talk to everybody and then leave. So in other words, the police um, were not trespassing residents, legitimate residents of motels during the COVID crisis. And so that's yet another thing that the residents of Forsyth County and Winston-Salem are lucky that, because in a lot of other places, the police were happily trespassing
Which
residents.
would mean they would have to leave.
Yes, what happens when the police trespass somebody is they show up, they ask them once politely to leave, and if they don't do it, then they take out the cuffs and escort them off the property. But again, for the most part, we have not seen the police doing that during this crisis.
Because, again, obviously that would kind of defeat the whole purpose of the stay-at-home order, staying safe, staying housed, if indeed individuals, institutions, motels, et cetera, are basically putting people back out on the street. And then that opens up a whole nother aspect of contact tracing, exposure, and, detriments to health and well-being as well.
Yes, exactly.
So what recourse, I know when I asked you about the process of eviction, or what the legal process of eviction is, what types of recourse, or you mentioned about the appeal process. I guess, first of all, when an eviction is happening and there is a court date, is that how they are notified, by that summons that they're received, that they are either delivered or that's posted on their door? So that's where the date is for the court date for them to go to court. What is the tenant's best responsibility or response in this whole eviction process?
Well, I should note, first of all, that in addition to either posting or personal service, the sheriff will always mail a copy, generally using an envelope from the landlord. So even if the copy that's shoved in your door jamb gets lost, you should get one in the mail. The trial date, this is a civil action, so the tenant is not required to go. And if the service of the court documents was by posting, then the tenant may want to consider not going. Because if they don't go, then no money judgment can be entered against them. And if they have a plan for leaving within about 17 days after the end of the trial, and they have no real defenses, not going may be their best option. Whether they go or not, they are entitled to an appeal. And if the tenant receives food stamps or SSI or TANF, then they're entitled to fill out a document called a petition to proceed as an indigent. And that allows them to appeal without paying the $150 filing fee or the undisputed amount of rent in arrears. Now, they do have to pay their rent going forward, starting on the date of trial. So they would pay a prorated rent to the clerk of court, not to the landlord, to the clerk of court. And then every month thereafter that the case is pending, they have to pay to the clerk of court their monthly rent within the first 5 business days of the month. If they fail to do that, then the landlord can obtain a writ of possession and have them padlocked about 1 week later by the sheriff.
So if someone knows that the eviction is happening and they are aware of that and they've pretty much decided that they are going to move, or so not going to court is probably an okay thing, especially if they have that plan, as you stated. But in their defense, if there is, like you said, a strong defense, they should definitely go to be able to defend themselves. Now, I know that non-payment is pretty cut and dry. What do you say, or what are the legal ramifications around residents who withhold payment because they want the landlord to make repairs and they are not making the repairs in a timely fashion, so they feel that they shouldn't have to pay their rent due to that?
Well, that feeling is understandable on the one hand, and the law in this particular area is not 100% settled. I'll just say that. It is my legal opinion and the opinion of most of my legal aid colleagues, that a tenant must pay the rent no matter what. The tenant is entitled to counterclaim in small claims court for failure to repair. And that's what's known as a rent rebate. So the tenant can file a counterclaim and ask for some of their money back. But it is my position. I guess I shouldn't speak for anybody else. It is my position that the landlord has to maintain the residence whether the tenant pays the rent or not, and the tenant must pay the rent whether the landlord maintains the residence or not. Now, nonetheless, there are many situations where the tenant gets fed up with the landlord not making repairs. And I guess the only thing I can say about that is that the
housing code, violation, then that would be something that you could report to, the code officials, correct? If it's a repair that's warranting some type of safe housing code violation, then there's other entities that a resident could potentially contact in order to help resolve that issue. And also, what is your knowledge or feeling of the human relations department with the city of Winston-Salem for landlord-tenant right or mediation?
Well, let's start with code enforcement. If the tenant lives within the boundaries of the city of Winston-Salem, then the city code enforcer, and I'm afraid I don't have that number in front of me, but you can just Google City of Winston-Salem and call their main number, and they'll put you in touch with code enforcement. And yes, they will come out and inspect. Now, I'm not 100% certain if they're doing, if they're up and running at full capacity right now. A number of code enforcement officials around the state are only doing exterior exterior inspections right now. But of course, the most important thing is generally on the interior. So if you can get them to come out, my experience with the city code enforcers has been very positive. They're professionals, they're trained, and if they find major infractions or a certain number of minor infractions, they will issue an order to repair to the landlord, which can be a very powerful weapon. Now, you also asked about the City Human Relations Commission, and I'm glad you did. They have a number of very, very good programs. One is fair housing. If a tenant feels that he or she is being discriminated against by the landlord on the basis of race or color or sex or national origin, whatever,
status,
family status, disability, then you can call the Human Relations Commission at the City of Winston-Salem. They have very good professional investigators who will investigate the claim and evaluate it and attempt to conciliate it. They are absolutely top-notch when it comes to handling fair housing complaints. In addition to that, they also run a mediation program, which is 100% voluntary. So if the landlord and the tenant agree, they can go to mediation and try to hammer things out with mediation run by, or at least overseen by, the City of Winston-Salem Human Relations Commission. So that they have a lot of very good programs, and again, you can just Google them to get the number and contact.
Yes, they are. They're an excellent organization. They will even come out to other well, at least pre-COVID, do housing, fair housing overviews and trainings for organizations and such that work with the public as well. So we partner with them on a few things as well. And I'd like to just plug that I was actually on the commission many years ago. So with regards to the legal aid of North Carolina, how are you guys operating now with the current pandemic? What are local offices doing? And most importantly, what is the best and easiest way for a tenant, resident, community individual contact legal aid to try and get some type of assistance or talk to someone?
The local Winston-Salem office is closed. There is no receptionist answering the phone, and this is entirely due to COVID. Uh, the office will reopen someday, but we don't know exactly when. Even before COVID, however, almost all of our intake was done through a helpline in Raleigh, and that number is 866-219-5262. You can also apply online just by Googling Legal Aid of North Carolina. I will caution you that there are some fake organizations out there that are trying to redirect Google searches from legal aid.
Wow.
So there's an easy way to tell the difference, however. We are legalaidnc.org. The other way to tell the difference is that they will ask for money.
Yeah.
Legal aid does not ask for money. If your legal aid attorney is asking you to send a gift card, that person is a fake. But the best way to get a hold of us is 866-219-5262. And then the case is they ask questions of the potential client, then they call them back, ask more questions, and then if it's appropriate, if it fits our priorities, then the case is transferred to the local office and a local attorney will call the tenant. Now, our focus right now is in keeping people housed because it's very important, as you mentioned earlier, not to have people thrown out into the street. It's just not safe during a global pandemic.
Correct.
So, and we are a private statewide nonprofit, but our resources are limited. We don't have lots and lots of attorneys to throw at every case that comes in the door, but we do go to court. We do try to defend evictions, particularly when we think that if our representation can help a family in our evaluation and our estimation, then we really want to try to do that. So we help as many people as we can. We can't help everybody, but even when we can't, calling that number 866-219-5262. Even then, you can almost always get some advice for how to handle your case, even if they don't transfer it to the local office.
Okay, good. That was going to be my next question. I was going to ask, even if it's a specific situation that maybe you can't take the case, or maybe it's someone that just has some questions. I know that a lot of times, attorneys' offices can't necessarily give out legal advice over the phone, but in some instances, I was wondering if some small tidbits of advice would be appropriate to help guide someone through a potential eviction process, just so that they're informed and know best what to do based on their situation.
Yes, what our helpline does, and I suppose I should mention that waiting online for 30 to 60 minutes is not unusual. So
Okay.
waiting on hold, I should say. But once you get through, they take some information, and then a lawyer, and a file is opened, and then the lawyer will then call the person back. And at that point, a limited attorney-client relationship is established. And at that point, the helpline lawyer can give them advice.
Oh, okay.
About how to handle the case.
Okay, that's good to know.
The reason a lot of lawyers can't do that is because they're restricted in that if a person is not a client, they shouldn't be giving them advice. But our helpline is able to create a limited attorney-client relationship just for the purposes of giving advice, even if it's not a case that they're allowed to transfer to the local office.
Are you able to share or explain a little bit about what the criteria may be for a resident to be eligible for legal aid services?
The most important one is income. We only represent low-income people.
Okay.
If your income is too high, we can't represent you. If citizenship or immigration status is also important, we represent citizens, lawful permanent residents, and certain other immigration statuses. But for the most part, if you're not a citizen, well, many non-citizens we cannot represent. Certainly if you're undocumented, in housing cases. In domestic violence cases, we can represent undocumented people. But then Congress determines what cases we can and cannot accept because they give us, I don't know, a significant portion of our funding. We'll say about half. Um, and so they feel entitled to write regulations to govern us. And so we have priorities that are set, and we can only take cases in certain priorities. But in addition to that, right now, of course, we are, because evictions are up and we're very busy, we are really trying to focus on preserving tenancies. And in some cases, if a family needs a housing subsidy in order to, not be homeless, we would also prioritize saving the housing subsidy.
Okay.
So if it's a private landlord-tenant eviction and there's no real defense, there's not a lot of value that we can add to that case. If it's a dispute that's more about money than about preserving somebody's tenancy, at least right now, we are taking relatively few of those cases because we just don't have enough attorneys to go around.
Are you able, if someone may not be eligible or a case may not be accepted, does legal aid offer any referrals to other attorneys that they may suggest?
We do not.
Okay.
However, there is a North Carolina lawyer referral service. I don't have that number, but
Okay.
Google it. And I think the charge is $50 for 30 minutes. So there is a process by which we sometimes will transfer a case to a private attorney who is a volunteer, basically going to do it on the same basis we would. If we can't handle a case for some reason, either a conflict or we just don't have enough lawyers, we can transfer it to a private pro bono attorney who will do the case for nothing. And right now, what we're doing is we have trained 200 private attorneys across the state to handle landlord-tenant mediations.
Oh,
So,
that's good.
We have a number of lawyers who are willing to handle negotiations and/or mediations to try to sort of iron out either payment plans or some kind of settlement agreement to give the tenant some compensation for things that aren't fixed in the house, or whatever the issues are between the landlord and the tenant, to try to work out some kind of plan that benefits everybody, keeps the tenant in place, make sure the landlord gets some income. So that's one of the projects we're working on right now.
That's good to know. So with regards to any type of financial resources, now as a plug for our agency, again, Financial Pathways of the Piedmont, although we do not have funds that we can hand out or give to support or help in any evictions or housing expenses, we are a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. So we are able to assist folks in budgeting, possibly even making those phone calls to assist a low-level mediation or a payment plan, at least, possibly, depending on who the landlord is, obviously. Most of the time when it comes down to a legal situation, we usually also refer to legal aid, or that they seek some type of legal representation, because we are not attorneys. We do handle a lot of foreclosure prevention counseling, and because normally there's either programs or, again, it's working directly with the mortgage servicer. So we're just kind of like the mediator in between that to kind of facilitate those conversations, because a lot of times when it is the resident, the homeowner, or the tenant, the emotions are so high, and so having a neutral third party that is able to kind of navigate those conversations can be very helpful. So we do offer those types of services. And again, we refer out a lot. What types of referral resources or financial resources are you able to provide or give to any tenants that may be needing some help right now?
Well, first of all, legal aid does offer, if a foreclosure goes to court, legal aid does sometimes offer legal representation in that situation. We do sometimes do bankruptcies for people if there's a major asset that needs protecting. But in terms of landlord-tenant, which is my specialty, there are, for residents of Winston-Salem, the three places that I would look to for rental assistance specifically would be legal aid. We have some funds that we are managing from the Winston-Salem Foundation, and the way to access that is that same number, 866-219-5262. And then there are also community action agencies, local community action agencies in Winston-Salem. The first one is Crisis Control Ministry. They are at 336-724-7453. And Experiment in Self-Reliance, 336-722-9400. And you know, we live in terrible times, but the flip side of that is that people are really pulling together, and there are some resources to help families that need rental assistance and through no fault of their own can't pay their rent, and without that rental assistance will be evicted. So I would encourage people to seek out rental assistance from those three sources.
Great. Okay, great. And we also do a lot of referrals through crisis control and to ESR as well. So that's good that you mentioned those agencies, because we are aware of many of the agencies in the area and partner with a lot. So that's good to know that that those are also available. And just one kind of closing question. It's kind of not a legal tenant landlord type situation, but just curious as to, with the elder law clinic at Wake Forest closing, is legal aid able to assist any of those cases with regards to our aging population?
Yes, we have a senior law project.
Oh, great.
And I'm sorry to admit that I don't have that phone number in front of me.
Oh, no, that's fine.
You can just Google it, Legal Aid Senior Law Project. And they are a smaller, they're very similar to our helpline in Raleigh, except they're a smaller operation, but they also have way fewer people calling them. And so they provide a lot of different types of help to senior citizens in North Carolina. They have different funding restrictions, which is a good thing. They're, if a senior citizen is maybe slightly too high to apply for regular legal aid services, they might be able to get help through the Senior Law Project.
Okay, great. That's good to know.
Yeah, they are an excellent organization, and they do have a statewide helpline, and just like a regular helpline, if appropriate, they will refer the case to the Winston-Salem office for assistance.
And for some of those numbers that we didn't have, like the Senior Law Project, the City of Winston-Salem Human Relations Department, we will make sure to post those phone numbers along with the other phone numbers that Ed has mentioned, so that we can make sure all of this information is readily available to anyone that may come across this recording. Ed, any final thoughts with do you think anything else will transpire with regards to government protections, something similar to what the CARES Act was with preventing evictions and moratoriums? Do you think that there's likely to be something else down the road that will happen, or is it just kind of hard to gauge right now?
I have a very poor track record predicting what politicians will do, but the best advice I can give is call somebody who knows. That our helpline always keeps up to date on that sort of thing.
Okay, good.
I am hopeful that more rental assistance money will somehow come through. I'm also hopeful that they're going to extend the federal moratorium on properties that are supported by the federal government. Neither of those things has happened yet. We at Legal Aid will definitely keep track of those, and we will keep up to date on them. So, you know, give us a call, and we'll we will let you know.
We may have to do an update call. You never know in a couple of weeks or so. I know in the past, especially through the crisis and the recession that led to the housing crisis in 2008, 9, 10, and so on, that we did see a lot of mortgage help, but there was not any rental help. And so that's the population that always seems to be left out, is that when there is extreme job loss, it's not just homeowners that suffer, it is also renters and tenants that suffer as well, and we all need housing. So I hope that, as you said, that they will think about that in the wide range and not just specific to homeowners, that we need to think about everyone and all of their different living situations. So so we'll just kind of hang on and see what happens. And to everyone out there that hears this video, if there are some changes that come in the future with regards to any protections, moratoriums, programs, especially around housing and housing assistance, we will definitely keep up to date with that information. We may have to do a follow-up call with Ed or with someone else in his office. I really appreciate your time. And thank you very much. And if anyone has any specific questions for either Financial Pathways of the Piedmont or for legal aid, you can reach us at 336-896-1191. You can reach Legal Aid's Intake Helpline at 866-219-5262. And thank you very much, and I appreciate your time, Ed.
Thank you.